Bonnie Jo Campbell grew up on a small Michigan farm with her mother and 4 siblings in a house her grandfather built. After leaving home to study philosophy at the University of Chicago, she went on to hitchhike across the United States and Canada, to scale the Swiss Alps with her bicycle, to travel with the Barnum and Bailey Circus selling snow cones, to raise donkeys, and to complete an MFA in creative writing at Western Michigan University and become an award-winning short story writer and novelist. She's the author of 4 critically acclaimed books, 2 collections of short stories, Women and Other Animals, and American Salvage. The 2 novels include Q Road and Once Upon a River. After the reading tonight, there'll be a time for questions and discussions, and then you can purchase books and have Bonnie sign them if you're interested in that. But please join me in welcoming Bonnie Jo Campbell.
I thought I would start out reading a poem just while I'm getting your attention. And I'm writing a series of poems about mathematics. Because women and mathematics go together very well. In fact, I'm writing a whole novel about a woman who loves mathematics, but I'm just going to read you a poem to warm you up. This is called Set Theory. Do y'all remember what a Venn diagram is? Yeah. Okay, I couldn't believe somebody told me they didn't know what a Venn diagram was. Yeah. It's called Set Theory, and it has one of these little epigrammy things at the beginning. It's not an epitaph, epigram, probably. And it says, "Nothing is better than eternal happiness. A ham sandwich is better than nothing. Therefore, a ham sandwich is better than eternal happiness." Anonymous. Set Theory. There is only one empty set, and it exists around the world. The set of loyal lovers and living unicorns, honest politicians, and the contents of the intersection of any 2 non-intersecting sets. Sets are aggregates of things to be divided and united. You can fill your sets with cardinal numbers or with cardinals. And those cardinals might have red feathers or army green feathers, or they might be cardinals in the Vatican in Rome, voting for a pope. Set theory lets you put them together. Math does what the Catholic Church cannot. The empty set is the set of lady cardinals knitting socks in Rome, discussing theology and wielding power lightly, pausing to commend their cleaning ladies, to tousle the heads of altar boys. The empty set is not the same as nothing. The universal set is not the same as everything, and arrives with paradoxes of its own. John Venn, a humble man, never called them Venn diagrams, but used Euclidean circles to show logical relations all day, until climbing into bed with his wife, whom he feared would devour him in an act of intersection and union. Our aggregates of things can weigh us down, Lord knows, and what's true of those you love beyond measure will also be true of the elements of the empty set. Yeah, I got a whole series of these coming. It's for people who think they don't love math. When you come at it from the right angle and with a couple glasses of wine, you can love math. But they never let you do that, did they? That wasn't how they brought math to you. Okay, I'm going to read a story from my collection, my second collection, American Salvage, and which some of you have. I think this is one of the ones they're selling. And this is a very difficult story. And a lot of the students in here have read this story, and your faculty members thought you should hear it again from my voice. But it's a difficult story, and it's written in a kind of an odd form, so maybe that makes it interesting. But trust me, I can get you through to the end, through the pain. This is called The Solutions to Brian's Problem. Solution number 1. Connie said she was going out to the store to buy formula and diapers. While she's gone, load up the truck with the surround sound home entertainment system and your excellent collection of power tools. Put the baby girl in the car seat and drive away from this home you built with your own hands. Expect that after you leave, Connie will break all the windows in the living room, including the big picture window, as well as the mirror over the fireplace, which you've already replaced twice. The furnace will run and run. Solution number 2. Wait until Connie comes back from the store, distract her with the baby, and then cut her meth with Drano so that when she shoots it up, she dies. Solution number 3. Put the baby to bed in her crib and sit on the living room couch until Connie comes home. Before she has a chance to lie about where she's been, grab her hair and knock her head hard into the fireplace that you built from granite blocks that came from the old chimney of the house your great-grandfather built when your family first came to this country from Finland. Blocks you gathered from the old foundation in the woods behind your mother's house. Don't look at the wedding photos on the mantle. Don't look at Connie's wide wedding day smile or the way her head tilts to the side to show the little scar above her eyebrow. Don't let the blood stop you from hitting her one final time to make sure you have cracked her skull. Put her meth and her bag of syringes and blood-smeared needles in her hand so the cops find them when they arrive. Solution number 4. Just go. Call your mother and then head south to where it's warm. Contact the union about getting a job with another local. Pretend not to have a wife and baby. When put to the test, Connie might well rise to the occasion of motherhood. Resist taking any photographs along with you, especially the photographs of your baby at every age. Wipe your mind clear of memories, especially the memory of your wife first telling you she was pregnant, and how that pregnancy and her promise to stay clean made everything seem possible. The two of you kept holding hands that night. You couldn't stop reaching for each other, not even in your sleep. She lost that baby and the next one. And although you suspected the reason, you kept on trying. Solution number 5. There are 7 solutions. Solution number 5. Blow your own head off with the 12 gauge you keep behind the seat of your truck. Load the shotgun with shells, put the butt against the floor, rest your chin on the barrel, and pull the trigger. Let your wife find your bloody corpse in the living room. Let her scrape your brain off the walls. Maybe that will shock her into straightening up her act. Let her figure out how to pay the mortgage and the power bill. Solution number 6. Call a helpline. Talk to a counselor. Explain that last week your wife stabbed you in the chest while you were sleeping. That she punches you too, giving you black eyes that you have to explain to the guys at work. Explain to the counselor you're in danger of losing your job, your house, your baby. Tell her Connie has already sold your mountain bike and some of your excellent power tools, that you've been locking everything of value in your truck, which you park a few blocks away from the house now in a different spot every day. Tell the counselor it's the little things too, that you found your financial files in the refrigerator and the food was in the basement. You had to throw away the milk and the hamburger. Try to be patient when the counselor seems awkward in her responses, when she inadvertently expresses surprise at the nature of your distress, especially when you admit to her that Connie's only 5 foot tall. Expect the counselor to be even less supportive when you say, "Hell yes, you hit her back." Then realize that the counselor probably has caller ID. Hope that the counselor doesn't call social services because a baby girl needs her mama. Assure the counselor that Connie is a good mama. She's good with the baby. The baby is in no danger. Solution number 7. Make dinner for yourself and your wife with the hamburger in the fridge. Sloppy Joes, maybe, or goulash with the stewed tomatoes your mother canned. Your mother, who, like the rest of your family, thinks your wife is just moody. You haven't told them the truth because it's too much to explain. And it's too much to explain that, yes, you knew she had this history when you married her, but you thought you could kick it together. You thought that love could mend all broken things. Wasn't that the whole business of love? Mix up some bottles of formula for later tonight when you will be sitting in the living room, feeding the baby, watching the door of the bathroom, behind which your wife will be searching for a place in her vein that is not hardened or collapsed. When she finally comes out, brush her hair back from her face and try to get her to eat something. So I don't know if you guys have this meth problem around these parts, but in Michigan we have a little. Is there meth? I think it's everywhere. So, yeah, I just found a few years ago. This book has a lot of stories that have a kind of that touch on the meth problem. And I found that when I was working on, I won't say I was working on this book because I was just writing stories, and the stories about things that were the things I tend to write about are unsolvable problems. If you've got a problem you can solve, just solve it. Don't write about it. But if you've got a problem that really doesn't have an easy solution, we're taught to be problem solvers, but some problems don't have easy solutions, and so those are often a good place to go when you're writing. A good place to look for writing ideas. And you might say that in families, we often have unsolvable problems just because those other people in our family are exactly who they are and they won't change. So I thought I'd do something kind of different here. I wrote about a topic. I became very interested in a topic, and actually it became the title story for this collection, American Salvage. I became obsessed with a tow truck driver in my hometown who was beaten very badly and basically left for dead, and he didn't die, and just kept on not dying. It was amazing, and the doctors thought he was dead, and he came back to life, and believe it or not, went back to driving his tow truck. Nobody thought to take away his license, and so he just kind of wandered out of the hospital and went back to towing vehicles. And I became obsessed with him because he was, he's a Lazarus story. I mean, he really rose from the dead, and he went back to living a life that made him happy and that was important to the people. He was an important part of our community. So there's your other place to search for story ideas. Those things you're obsessed with that you can't let go of. So I wrote a very long nonfiction piece, a creative nonfiction piece about this tow truck driver. And I also wrote the title story for the collection, was about a fictionalized version of the tow truck driver story. And I also wrote some poems about it. So I thought you guys might like to see how I use the same material in those different formats, so those different forms. So I'll start out with the nonfiction. And I'd like to do everything I do, I'd like to do this way. Write a real life story where you really hold the truth. And then when you can't stand the truth anymore and have to burst out of it, then you write the fiction. And then after you've written the fiction, there's some leftover stuff you didn't get to say, and those can go into poetry. I don't know if I just gave short shrift to poetry, but it seems how it happens for me. Okay, this is called Crimes Against a Wrecker Driver. And you'll notice the vocabulary in here. You'll see that I used a lot of the vocabulary again when I wrote the fiction. I borrowed some of the vocabulary from real life. Crimes Against a Wrecker Driver. And the subtitle here is The Assault. This is the first section. And this is true. So to me, it makes a big difference if I'm writing the truth. Because I'm asking you to believe that what I'm telling you actually happened in the world, that the people were actually affected. The pain that I'm going to talk about was real pain that people felt. And to me, that is a little bit different than what I do in fiction, where I'm creating something like a dream that I'm asking you to get caught up in. So, The Assault. On a Saturday night, October 19th, 2002, Henry Lanning and Chad Van Duzen, each 6 foot tall and over 230 pounds, pulled into Don York's driveway in a borrowed GMC Jimmy. They had an iron pipe and a roll of duct tape and gloves. Lanning got out and approached the house while Van Duzen stayed in the vehicle. York had heard the neighbor's dog barking, so he opened the upstairs window and turned on the outside light. Lanning shouted up that he needed a jump for his vehicle parked down the road. York, who is a trim man, 5'8", with shoulder-length white hair, did not know Lanning. But when he saw the guy was wearing brand new gloves, he felt something was wrong. He yelled down, "I'm in for the night." He told Lanning to go jump the car himself with the vehicle he was driving. His house alarm system was already set, but after he closed the window, he loaded his shotgun anyway with 4 cartridges. That night and the next few nights, he slept with the shotgun in his bedroom. Chad Van Duzen was Don York's ex-wife's nephew, and Van Duzen had met Henry Lanning a few days earlier at the home of a mutual friend, and both men were absconders from their parole. In Van Duzen's words, they both needed to hit a lick, which was to say they needed to make some money fast. However, the men gave up on York that night and went home, according to Van Duzen, who later pled guilty to conspiracy to commit armed robbery. According to the prosecution and key witnesses, Lanning returned alone 3 nights later with some rope and a busted-off tree branch, the length and thickness of a baseball bat, hid in the trees outside York's house and waited. Don York was known to be a man who didn't like banks. Anyone who knew him knew he carried in his pockets rolls of cash from which he could peel as many 20s, 50s, 100s as he needed. And he was rumored to keep his life savings in his house. Don York has always driven a tow truck, and for 25 years, he has run his small junkyard just beyond the border of Comstock Township, where he grew up and almost graduated high school in 1967. At York's junkyard, you can buy tires, engines, radiators, starters, and alternators for American cars and trucks for less money than you can get them anywhere else. Before he owned the salvage yard, he used to part out cars in his backyard. On the following Tuesday night, October 22nd, at about 8 o'clock, York pulled in the driveway, shone his bright lights on his front door so he could see to unlock it, turned off his alarm, then went back out to his wrecker to get the pizza he picked up for dinner. The next thing he remembers is waking up in the hospital 3 weeks later. John Weaver, York's cousin, also from Comstock, works at the salvage yard, and he often pats his front pocket, checking for the position of his pistol, a .357 Magnum with a smooth top that doesn't catch on his jeans. He's inclined to remind customers it's there. In winter, you can sometimes find Weaver sitting in front of the wood stove with his arms crossed, wearing a Kentucky Fried Chicken baseball cap or a Dale Earnhardt cap above his wire-frame glasses. And if you come in, he asks you what the hell you want. If you want to buy a tire, he'll use his machine to take the old one off your rim for $2 and put another one on for another $2. And he probably will call you a fool or some variation on that theme. He recently referred to Henry Lanning as that doofus motherfucker. Weaver says he has to be tough to deal with the kind of people who come into the salvage shop. Half of them are drug addicts, he says. Weaver can yank an engine and other valuable parts of a car in a few minutes so that York can tow to the shredder what can't otherwise be sold. Early afternoon on this day, on Wednesday, October 23rd, Weaver got a call at the shop. York's neighbors called, wanting to know if York was all right. And I said, hell, I don't know. I haven't seen him since yesterday. And then Weaver goes out to find him. And he says, there was blood all over his wrecker and on the side of the house, and you can see where York had gotten away, almost made it to the neighbors along that row of trees. As a matter of fact, that's where they found his pager. His door was closed, but it wasn't locked. And I went in and found him lying there on the floor. Well, I opened the door and went in, and York was laying there as you walk inside, and he was curled into a ball, and I rolled him over. I didn't even recognize him. He was beat so bad. Weaver didn't believe it was York until he pushed aside his blood-soaked work jacket and saw the label on his shirt that said Don. His head was swollen the size of a basketball, Weaver says. He was beat real bad around the head and face. When I rolled him over, there was a hole in his head right here, and stuff was oozing out of him. Okay, so that's the real life story. And it took them forever to catch this guy. I don't know how the cops are around here, but in Kalamazoo, they just wait till somebody confesses to somebody else in jail. And it just takes forever, you know? I mean, I understand it's a cleaner way to do it, but... Okay, so here's the first 2 pages of the fictionalized story. What I found was that in this story, it was kind of a stranger who beat this guy up. And I thought, wouldn't it be a more interesting story if somehow the person who beat this guy up was somehow connected to him a little bit more, a little closer connection? I thought that would create heat. And often when we're trying to fictionalize something from real life, we're trying to turn it into fiction, what we need to do is create heat. We need to make it hotter. Real life is hot because we know it really happened. But when you're trying to create fiction, you need to create different kind of heat. You need to create something that pulls people in a different way, that doesn't rely on it actually having happened in the world. Okay, so this is called King Cole's American Salvage. On a windy evening in February, William Slocum Jr., 11 months out of prison, pulled into King Cole's driveway in a Jeep he'd stolen from an apartment complex near his girlfriend's house. He'd cut through the Jeep's canvas top with a utility knife, popped the ignition with a screwdriver, and hot-wired the engine, a trick William Slocum Sr. had taught him not long before passing out drunk on the railroad tracks. Slocum's car had broken down 2 days ago, and King Cole of King Cole's American Salvage had given him $70 for it, minimum scrap price. That old Mitsubishi Montero hadn't been registered or insured, so if he'd left it broken down on the road, the city of Kalamazoo would have impounded it. But still, Slocum felt Cole had ripped him off, had not given him what the car was worth. Slocum and his girlfriend Wanda were now without any car, since hers had been repossessed 2 months ago. She also hadn't managed to pay her mortgage or get enough methamphetamine to keep herself going, since she lost her job, and Slocum hadn't been getting any work either, so things were tight. He tried to make love with Wanda last night, but without the meth, it wasn't working, and he knew tonight he needed to hit a lick. If he didn't, Wanda was bound to lose faith in him. Slocum got out of the Jeep, carrying with him a length of galvanized pipe he'd swiped from Parker's Auto Repair, where he bought meth sometimes, and where he'd met Johnny Cole, King Cole's nephew. They'd known each other less than 2 weeks, but right off, Slocum knew Johnny was a solid guy. Although he was 5 years younger than Slocum and still pocked with acne, Johnny was generous with the homegrown and seemed like the kind of person you could trust, a rare quality. Slocum had liked the way the kid had asked his advice, had seemed to look up to him. Slocum knocked hard on King Cole's ornate wood and wrought iron front door, and in about a minute, King swung open an upstairs casement window and turned on the security light, which lit up the crusted snow. Slocum could see by the tire tracks that the tow truck was the only vehicle that had been there recently. According to Johnny, the man's wife had died years ago, And according to the sticker on the window, Cole had an alarm system. "What do you want?" King said through the screen. The small man stood with one hand on his pot belly. His long beard and shoulder-length hair were black. Johnny had told him the old man dyed it because he thought it made him attractive to the ladies. "I need a jump start or maybe a tow," Slocum said. "I don't work at night. Call somebody else." Cole started to close a window. "I'm a friend of Johnny's," Slocum said quickly and backed up so King could hear him better. "Your nephew Johnny. You scrapped my old car the other day, the blue Mitsubishi." Cole opened the window again. "That Jap crap isn't worth a shit." "That's what you said." Slocum had stayed up late smoking and drinking beer with Johnny a few nights ago, and when Johnny was stoned, he told Slocum what a cheap bastard King Cole was, how Johnny worked his ass off for his uncle, but the man wouldn't lend Johnny enough money to buy some old diesel truck he wanted. King Cole didn't like banks, Johnny had said, and he carried a shitload of money on him, thousands of dollars in hidden pockets in his jacket. I should go out to his house late some night and negotiate my own loan, Johnny had said, and they had both laughed. And since I read just a little bit about the gory stuff, I'll show you how I translated a little bit of the gory stuff. The way the story goes is that there's a court trial, and Johnny thinks he's going to be implicated by this other guy as part of the crime. And yet Johnny's been taking care of King Cole after he's been hurt. King always claimed to remember nothing, but Johnny wondered if someday a brain cell would reignite, the way a fire you thought was out sometimes left a spark that could rekindle and burn a house to the ground. Johnny slipped his hat off when he went up to the stand and wished he'd combed his hair once more. He had bought new jeans for the occasion, but he still felt as though he were stained with grease and oil. King was curled up in the snow, Johnny said under oath, and choked on his voice. He felt Slocum's eyes on him, but he was afraid to look back, afraid of what monster he might see there. He was beat so bad I didn't recognize him, Johnny said, head swollen as big as a basketball. His hair and beard was soaked with blood and his face was mashed. Johnny's heart pounded as he spoke. I begged him to be alive. I turned him over, and there was gray stuff coming out of the hole in his head, and I could smell the blood. Then I saw he was breathing. Johnny had thought the blood and brains smelled like metal and chemicals, something from the salvage yard. So you can see how I took some of those pieces, like that phrase, "hit a lick." I didn't know that phrase. I thought that was a good phrase, and it has a slightly different meaning, kind of on the street than it would anywhere else, I think. Then I'll read you a poem I wrote about it. A lot of people don't like narrative poems, but I do. I like poems that tell stories. I just recently read the Iliad. I'd never read that. They make you read the Odyssey a lot, but not the Iliad so much. I'll never read it again. It's too much. It's all these guys fighting. That's what it is. And then you know what? They're like fighting, and then, okay, it's a great work of art, one of the most important ones. But I'm just saying, since we're a bunch of gals here, I know you guys have a different idea. But but there's a big war on that's really important. And then so they take 3 days off of the war to have some sporting events. But they really need their strength for this war. They really need their strength. And so instead, they go all out and have little games with each other. So, okay. Okay, this is called Lake and Olmsted, which is the main intersection in my neighborhood. Lake and Olmsted. Everybody rises up again in this place like a bunch of stoned, hungry phoenixes with acne and ringworm and knuckle tattoos. The rapist gets out of jail with a boner for the liquor store clerk. Nobody pays child support, and abortions don't take. Fetuses cling to uteri like barnacles to boat bottoms. The boys who cook meth bash open the head of our tow truck driver, leave him in the snow to die, and he lies there for a day, moaning at first and then a long time silent. But he rises up again to drive, to tow the uninsured cars of coke whores and scrap metal thieves. We build a shrine to him in the bloody snow where his brains leaked out, and only a few of us rob him now. Okay, so we're getting close to 8 o'clock. So how are we doing, Tom? Should I read one more thing and then give you guys a chance for some questions? What do you think? Or do you already have questions? Okay. Oh, you're so nice. Maybe for something different, since I'm reading all this dirty stuff, I'm going to read a little bit from the beginning of Once Upon a River, because this book is very different. My first collection of stories, Women and Other Animals, was all about women and girls. And then this book is all about men and boys. And in this story, I was trying to write something almost like a modern-day fairy tale, sort of, about a magical girl who inhabits a magical place, but that magical place is real-life Michigan in the year about 1980, was real-life river life. So I had to write a kind of, I'm what's known as a realist. So I write very realistic fiction, and I veer toward the gritty side. And in fact, my agent calls me a dirty realist. But this writing is very, I had to do something very different in here. It had to be very much more ornamental, and it had to be more descriptive. So just so you can feel the different texture, I'll just read a little bit of this. So Once Upon a River, Chapter 1. The Stark River flowed around the Oxbow at Murrayville the way blood flowed through Margot Crane's heart. She rode upstream to see wood ducks, canvasbacks, and ospreys, and to search for tiger salamanders in the ferns. She drifted downstream to find painted turtles sunning on fallen trees and to count the herons in the heronry beside the Murrayville Cemetery. She tied up her boat and followed shallow feeder streams to collect crayfish, watercress, and tiny wild strawberries. Her feet were toughened against sharp stones and even broken glass. When Margot swam, she swallowed minnows alive and felt the Stark River move inside her. She waded through serpentine tree roots to grab hold of water snakes and let the river clean the wounds from the non-venomous bites. She sometimes tricked a snapping turtle into clamping its jaws down hard on a branch so she could carry it home to Grandpa Murray. He boiled the meat to make soup and told the children that eating snapping turtle was like eating dinosaur. Margot was the only one the old man would take along when he fished or checked his animal traps, because she could sit without speaking for hours in the prow of the River Rose, his small teak boat. Margot learned that when she was tempted to speak or cry out, she should instead be still and watch and listen. The old man called her Sprite or River Nymph. Her cousins called her Nympho, though not usually within the old man's hearing. Margot, named Margaret Louise, and her cousins knew the muddy water in the brisk current, knew the sand and silt between their toes, scooped it into plastic cottage cheese tubs and sherbet buckets, and dribbled it through their fingers to build sagging stalagmites and soggy castles. They hollowed out the riverbanks, cut through soil and roots to create collapsing caves and tunnels. If any kid stood too long in a soft spot and sank above his knees, he just had to holler, and somebody pulled him free. They spent summers naked or nearly naked, harvesting night crawlers from the mossy woods and frogs' eggs from the goo in underwater snags. They built rafts from driftwood and baling twine. They learned to read upon the surface of the water evidence of distress below. Once, when Margot was 8 and her favorite cousin Junior was 9, they rescued an uncle who'd fallen in drunk. They all fished the snags at the edges of the river for bluegills, sunfish, and rock bass, though they avoided the area just downstream of the Murray metal fabricating plant, where a drain pipe released a mixture of wastewater, machine oil, and solvents into the river. Some of the fish there had strange tumors, bubbled flesh around their lips, a fraying at their gills. On certain windy days, the clay-colored smoke from the shop wafted along the river, reached them on their screen porches, and even when they closed their windows, the smoke entered their houses through floorboards and the gaps around their doors. The Murrays were a stubborn tribe, and Bernard Crane was no less stubborn for being born the bastard son of Dorothy Crane and Old Man Murray during his bout of infidelity, forgiven in time by a wife who, despite, or perhaps because of, her forgiving nature, died young. The old man begged Dorothy Crane to give their child his last name, but she put on the birth certificate, Father Unknown. Some said Dorothy was part Indian, and that was why Bernard was small, and others said that she had begrudged her baby sufficient milk at her breast because the old man would not leave his lawful wife, while others, including Cal Murray, denied that Bernard was in any way a Murray. Years later, however, when Bernard Crane, whom everyone called simply Crane, and his wife Luann gave birth to a beautiful green-eyed daughter, a spell of reconciliation was cast across the river. And all the Murrays claimed Margot. The girl's mother even enjoyed the favor of the other women for a while. More often, they referred to Luann as a free spirit. They did not mean it as a compliment. When the weather allowed, Margot and her cousins swam all day long. Even when drought made the river shallow enough to walk across, they swam to the Big Murray farmhouse on the north bank, where Aunt Joanna was hanging laundry or baking bread, and where Uncle Cal might let them shoot skeet with shotguns or plink targets with .22 rifles. They swam straight across to the heavily shaded Crane house, where Luann was often lying flat in a reclining chair at the end of the floating dock, in the only sun on the place, wearing an unfastened bikini. Luann lay browning like one of Joanna's loaves of bread, lifting her head and opening her eyes only to drink the watered-down white wine she kept in a mason jar full of melting ice. Her scent of cocoa butter drifted out onto the water, and the boys could not take their eyes off her. In the evenings, Margot rowed, swam, or floated home, and her mother woke up, anticipated the girls' return, and stood, perhaps unsteadily, on the dock, holding a towel for Margot, her favorite towel, oversized with a pattern of jungle greens. Margot's teeth would chatter as her mother wrapped and hugged her. Only then would Margot smell the sweet breath of wine inside the cloud of cocoa butter. Luann would say, "Hold on, Margaret Louise," as they made their way in an embrace down the dock, along the bank, and into the house. They checked Margot for bloodsuckers on the screen porch and doused any stragglers with salt. After they had both showered, Luann might go to bed with her bottle of wine and watch TV, or begin her 12-hour sleep. But Margot curled on the couch and waited for her father to get home from second shift at Murray Metal Fabricating, sometimes thumbing through her book about Annie Oakley, whose somber face she never tired of studying. Annie looked so natural with her rifles and shotguns, and it seemed to Margot that any girl would want a long gun at her side. When she'd said that to her ma, Luann had said tiredly, she didn't know how Annie Oakley could have fired so many times without killing anybody, without killing the whole damn lot of them. And Margot hadn't brought it up again. After a big storm or a sudden thaw, the river could become a passionate surge, dragging along debris from upstream, ill-secured boats and pieces of floats and docks that have been dashed against trees. All manner of stuff might be dragged up onto the riverbank. 55-gallon drums, mildewed buoys on nylon ropes, animal carcasses. And the floodwaters washed away what the Murrays had not secured or could not secure: sand from the sandbox, pig shit from the half-dozen pigs in the pasture, garden stakes and tomato cages left out from the previous summer, toys and dog dishes, thousands of shotgun shells and bullet casings from beside the barn. The yearly flood scrubbed the muskrat caves, drowned the moles, carried away burn barrels, wore away land, and swept clear portions of the earth. One February, after an early snowmelt, the cranes lost a whole cord of firewood that was stacked too close to the water's edge. The death of Margot's grandpa when she was 14 hit the whole family like one of those late winter floods, chilling everything, washing away that old generation and whatever invisible glue and strings had been holding the Murrays together. Margot had stayed by Grandpa's sickbed on the porch whenever they'd let her. After the funeral, she went out with Uncle Cal, loaded his lever-action .22 Marlin like Annie Oakley's with 15 long rifle cartridges, threaded her arm into the sling, and took aim through the iron sights. After her first shot went awry, Cal suggested she sit cross-legged and pull the sling tighter. The following 14 shots hit the paper target just left of center in a tight cluster. 12 of the shots created a single hole a little more than a half an inch across. "What the hell was that?" Cal said, running his fingers over the torn paper. "I've never shot like that in my life. That's unholy." Uncle Cal claimed credit for teaching her to shoot. But while Margot had felt his guidance, she had felt just as strongly the guidance of the gun itself. It held her steady, and then sadness perfected her aim. When Cal Murray took over as president of Murray Metal Fabricating, he called upon his sons to work in the summers rather than exploring the river all day. At about this time, Margot's mother began to put on makeup and disappear for hours in the afternoons. She always returned home at dusk, until one July evening when Margot found herself alone at the dock. Her oversized minnow net contained a giant puffball, white as the moon, bigger than her own head. Margot rose from the river, stood on the dock holding the skull-white mushroom, which she would slice and fry for dinner. The crane's little house was dark. When she turned on the kitchen light, she found the note on the table. She read and reread it, but could not crack its code. So many times Luann had said she could not bear living in this place, but there she had always been. Margot scratched her ankle and found a fat bloodsucker. She didn't have the patience to shrivel it with salt. Instead, she took a butcher knife, smashed the end of the wooden handle into the creature's head, and twisted until the bloody pulp fell onto the kitchen tile. So she was a really fun character to write about, Margot Crane. And I really had to get the shooting right too. I wrote a short story about a girl, a short story that's kind of contained in the novel, and I just kind of winged it. Just wrote about shooting like I thought it would be, and then so I did that in the novel. I wrote about shooting, and I shoot a little bit. I shoot. Everybody does in my neck of the woods, but I have a competition shooting friend. And he let me know, you didn't get it. You didn't get it right. But what he did say is that was helpful is that she is the kind of person who will shoot well. She's very thoughtful. She's very kind of a slow-moving person, doesn't jump to conclusions. And so that saved me. So it meant if I could learn how to shoot from my friend who kindly helped me, then I could write about this girl who was a shooter. So, does anybody have any questions about any of this? Mm-hmm.
What kind of discipline do you use to write?
I think fiction writers are among the most disciplined people on the planet. It almost makes us dull. Because it just means you just have to stay and write, and you just have to stick with the material. And you have to stick with it. I should say, fiction writers need to be very careful to choose material that really, really, really interests them, because it's going to be a long haul. My short stories, there's one short story in American Salvage that took me 24 years to write. I just couldn't get it right. I just wrote it, and I would take it out and write it again, and I would take it out and work on it again, and take it out and work on it again, and I would share it with friends, and they would say, "We hate these people. Why do you want to write about these people?" And I would say, "I guess I haven't got it right yet." So it's just a matter of putting in the time, and some of it is just organizational, just basically designing your entire life to make time for writing. So. Mm-hmm.
Did this take place on the White River in Whitehall, Michigan, that has a foundry?
No, it's a fictional river, but I was inspired by, I was inspired by many Michigan rivers. I grew up on the Kalamazoo River, but I grew up playing on the St. Joe River. So, but that the foundry is the thing you won't find on every river. So, do you know that area?
And Murray's Landing too.
Is there really a Murray's Landing there?
Was, yes.
Oh my goodness.
About 10 years ago.
Uh-oh, I thought I must have been, they say us writers are always stealing from real life, so.
Just asking.
You said that this is related to a story in American Salvage, and about that story, the family reunion.
Yeah.
Where did you originally get that idea?
It's so, when you trace stories back to how you created them, it's always kind of shocking. That story was originally inspired by something that is irrelevant at this point. It was cut out of the story. Somebody contacted me from a radio show, and they said everybody they wanted people to write a story that all had the same first line, and it was something like, when she saw the invitation, she couldn't believe it. So what a dull beginning to a story. And yet and the invitation was to a reunion, a family reunion. And so I guess with stories, it's just anything that you can jump off into, that you can start your imagination working and start building something. The thing is, I was trying to be sort of outrageous. I'll give away the part that's the funnest part, that has been written about the most, is that the gal in the short story. The gal is molested by an uncle, as happens, and she's not overly dramatic about it. But when she realizes a year later really what happened, her response is to shoot him while he's peeing, which seems the appropriate response. And so it was a really wicked fun thing to think of, to write about. And I sometimes think when we're writing, we just have to entertain ourselves in weird ways. I think we sometimes do it by giving characters certain names that have meanings to us. I have one story in Women and Other Animals where I put in all this Athena imagery, and it's really fun, and nobody sees it. Nobody notices it, nobody sees it, but it entertained me that I put the sound of an owl in there, and she has gray eyes, and nobody else is going to notice, but it just kind of sustained me, so.
How do you break into the publishing world? When you have something that you think you'd like to get published, how do you break into that?
Okay, I'm going to say one thing about publishing, and then you have to ask me afterwards, because you could teach courses on it. You could teach entire courses. We could fill. If you want to get published, write as well as you can, and it's probably not good enough, so you probably got to get better. So study and get better. And then when you're really good, and you know this because your friends who are truly your friends will let you know when a story is ready to get published, all you have to do is go out into the world, find out where work like yours is getting published, find out how work gets published in that place, whether it's through an agent or through submission, and then do what those writers did. And if your writing is good enough, you will be able to do that. Probably, if you're like most of us, then even after you figure that out, you have to go back and do it again. But basically, look in the world for writing like yours, find out where it's being published, and that is where your writing belongs. So.
When you write your fiction and you develop your characters, do you use the same standard type of technique whenever you write different stories for each character?
Yeah, I wouldn't say did everybody hear the question? No. Okay, the question was, do I use the same technique to build characters in all my stories? Do I have a set technique to do it? And I don't have a technique. Sometimes I start a story out where I already have a character in mind that I'm really interested in, but I wouldn't say that I have a technique for doing it. What I do is I just feel my way. I learn about my characters the same way I learn about people I meet at parties. I learn a little about them at a time. I listen to what they say. I see where they are. And then I try to engage them. This is what I do in real life. And it's kind of what I do in the stories, too. And it takes a long time. I don't want to rush it. I don't want to give characters characteristics without, in a hurry, because they might not be quite right. What I do is I develop the characters as I'm developing the story. So I develop just the right characters for the story, and I create just the right story for these characters. And so I'm moving at a pretty glacial pace in developing. There are a few writers out here, and there's probably a few in this room who write from an outline. Who writes a story from an outline? Oh, there's nobody in here. Okay, there's not very many. A few of them do. What a lot more of us do is once we get a draft, then we go back and look at it and maybe create something like an outline just to help us keep track of things. But most of us are just moving forward. Most of us write organically, and that means we got something. And it was that initial idea that made us want to write. We got that, and we move it forward. We move this giant this thing here. We push it forward like a snowball and gather a little more snow on it. And we see how much more we can do, and then we take a break and work on something else, and then work on it a little bit more. So nope, I don't have a particular technique, and I've never been one to, I don't know what your teachers make you do, but I can't do exercises in class. If somebody says, do an exercise where you invent a character and figure out what all the characteristics of this character are, it's like, no way, I just write grocery lists if somebody asks me to do that. I don't know why I can't do it, because it doesn't feel meaningful, like an exercise like that. So everything I write has to matter desperately. And so I didn't have that. I didn't write good stories for my classes at school. I didn't. Because it's only when I'm out in the world caring about something that I'm able to write a story about it. But, basing a character on a real person is, if you've got a real person who you want to base a character on, that's a good jumping off place. But then make sure that you don't stick to that foolishly to that character when changing that character would create more heat in the story. And most of the time when I've got a character in a story that I based on a real person, the real person would never recognize it by the end. It changes enough.
You had talked about in River how Margot was a fun character, right, and all that stuff. And as I was reading it, one of the things that I was trying to figure out the whole time is she has such a, in my eyes, weird relationship with sex, and that's a big part of the book is her sexuality. Not a big part, but it's present. I was wondering why you think she's like that.
What is weird about her relationship? What's weird about her sex?
It seems so.
I want to make him say it.
Yeah, it's passive, but animalistic, and the nympho thing is it's compulsive. I don't know what it is, but I'm saying it. And because reading it, I was trying to figure out why she's like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think of her as a nymphomaniac. She likes sex. She's a person who likes she's a very sensual person. She's most sensual when she's swimming, when she's in the water, and I think she just feels very natural. I mean, sex is not a strange thing to her when she finally has it, and she also, what a lot of people don't like in the book is there's one scene where she has to decide to have sex with someone in order to put a roof over her head, and a lot of people are upset with that, and I think that's a scene that meant my book will never be chosen as a community reads book. And yet, I would say that around the world and here in America, that's probably, sex happens more for that reason than it happens for the reason that we want it to happen. That young women have sex for safety or to have someone take care of them. So yeah, I didn't see it as unnatural. She's not a suburban girl who goes to the mall. I think she's very at ease in more natural situations, and so I saw her as the sex arising out of that, you know. And she's kind of a sexy gal, you know. I thought it was kind of fun to write a sexually. Really a gal with a voracious sexual appetite. It was fun to write that. As an old married lady of 50, been married 26 years, so you know, I think sometimes we write. I write things instead of having like affairs, because I took up writing poetry. When I was about 46. And wouldn't that have been the age where maybe I'd just been married 20 years, and like it felt like the wickedest thing. So I had an affair away from fiction instead of an affair away from my husband. But I felt so wicked, like I was like taking these words, and I felt like I was undressing little dolls or something. And so I think with Margot, it was fun to just make her voracious in a way, you know, that I didn't have the energy to be. Any other questions about how this fiction, nonfiction thing goes, or any of the inflammatory things I've intentionally said that will now be on tape forever here? I know. Did you guys hear that? That it's kind of she mentioned that it's kind of a thing that some writers and TV, I would say, that women are coming out as violent creatures, and I actually worry about that trend a little bit because, you know, if you watch, I'm currently watching Chuck on. Does anybody watch Chuck? It's on Netflix. My husband, you know, chooses things for us, so we're watching Chuck, and there's a woman who's a size 0, you know, kicking everybody's ass all the time, you know. So I kind of worry about that element of it where we're showing women to be violent. But I think in fiction, as long as you're really showing it realistically, and that she's really capable, and that was why it was really important for me to get the shooting right. Because, well, shooting is the rare sport in America for which, who do you think of as America's best shooter? Annie Oakley. And it's interesting that we have her as a role model. There are mostly it's men who win the shooting awards, but that's because it's mostly men who are in the sport. But shooting is something where men and women can almost perform equally. There's some differences with very heavy weaponry, but I wanted to choose something that could be realistic, and it's interesting to explore the limitations of it at the same time of women's power, women's physical power. I mean, as women, we don't want to rely on our physical power to, you know, first of all, because eventually we'll lose, but because that's not how we want to live.
I think stories about
Some people write those. I read some of those.
Can you talk a little bit about how you got into writing, when you started?
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I'm like a lot of writers that I wanted to write when I was young, and I tried to write, and I wasn't very good. And nobody told me that it was okay to not be very good. So I thought I couldn't do it. So I kept trying to write, and then I'd figure out I wasn't very good. So I'll just tell all of you, it's okay if you're not very good. You'll get better if you keep doing it, if you really want to do it. So I kept trying to give up writing over and over. That's why I studied mathematics. I have an undergraduate and graduate degree in mathematics because I thought I couldn't write. And, well, I kept feeling stupid, and I knew, well, if I could get a master's degree in math, it would mean I was smart. I was going to get a PhD, but luckily I took up writing seriously then during my PhD. And I did take and pass 4 of the preliminary exams, just in case you wondered. But I got out just in the nick of time, though. But I kept trying not to write. I thought it would just be a hobby, and I never expected to be able to do it for a living, so I'm very happy that for right now, at least for a couple years, I've been able to do it for a living. But, I mean, it just took years and years, and I guess I would say that I got serious about it in increments, but then the time it took was when I was about 35. So I guess from the time I was about 12 until I was 35, it was really the learning curve and figuring out. And then when I was about 35, I just kind of got better. And so if you want to write, you just keep on writing. And do other things too, because it's not very likely the writing's going to pan out. Even for me, and I'm not kidding. You know, I'm a National Book Award finalist, and I don't know if it's going to pan out for me. I don't know how my next book about the woman who studies math is going to do. You know.
I'm intrigued always by a good title, and I'm wondering, I love the
Aren't they hard to write?
They are, and I love the titles of both of your short story collections, Women and Other Animals and American Salvage, and I'm wondering if you could just talk about how.
It was so hard coming up with the titles. I've never had a title come to me easily. Never. American Salvage. Okay, this is funny. I actually had, I mean, it's funny to writers. A lot of you probably don't care. But I had this book, and it was accepted for publication, and it had a story about Romania in it. Can't believe that. And then I was searching around for a title, and I went around for months, with like just jotting down possible titles for my book. Possible, any combination of words that sounded good. And I came up with this phrase, American Salvage, but I didn't have a story that had American Salvage in it. So I had to write that story. And it was I told you it took me 24 years to write one of the stories. The story Bringing Belle Home, if any of you read it, took me 24 years to write. I wrote King Cole's American Salvage, of which I read from. I wrote that in 5 months. It's the fastest I have ever written a story, and I wrote it out of sheer desperation because I wanted to use the title, American Salvage. And I was already prepared for failure. I was going to figure out a way to like put a sign in one of my other stories that like said American Salvage or something so I could use it as a title. Because it's kind of ballsy to use the word American in your stories. I mean, some people do it, but it feels ballsy to me, so I felt like I did have to have it grounded in a story. So that was a challenge, and I bounced titles off of friends endlessly until they were exhausted and didn't want to talk to me. Women and Other Animals, I think was a joke. My husband said it as a joke. And then I had to beg my publisher because he didn't want to use it. He didn't like the "and other" phrase. He thought that was overused. But then after the book came out a year later, the publisher said to me, yeah, that was the right title. It was, I'm glad you fought. You fought for it. And this title came to my agent when he was in the shower. And I didn't like it for a long time. And it took me a long time to warm up to Once Upon a River. But then once I realized that it did give me that freedom to do this fairy tale thing, then I was really glad for it. It's very hard. I'll tell you guys the title for my math book, and I can't come up with another one. Math Slut. So you'll see more of that, a little more of that. I think it's magical because of the way that the words rub against one another. But I'm not. But I'm not sure it's the kind of title that I can use. So I don't know. I'm engaged with my friends all the time. Like, do you think I could call it donkey math? Doesn't have the charm. So I don't know. I'm still struggling. It's very hard. I think it's okay though. Who has trouble with titles? Yeah. And I think that's okay because, the second to the last thing you should ever get is the ending to your story. Because how could you know what everything in there is doing and bringing you to until you've already written it? And then you can know. And then I think, well, how do you know what that story is and what it's about until you've finally gotten it all together and gotten that ending on there? So, it might take you tell your teacher it's going to be another 23 and a half years, and you're going to have a title, but it's just going to take a while. You'll get back to him or her in retirement. Anything else? And I'm happy to answer questions if anybody wants to ask them privately. So thank you very much. It was a pleasure to see you all.